Right now, tonight, while you watch this, there is a radio station broadcasting from somewhere in Russia that has been transmitting, almost without a break, for over 40 years. Most of the time it just buzzes. A short, dull tone, over and over, around the clock. But every once in a while, the buzzing stops, and a human voice comes on and reads out names and numbers. Then the buzzing starts again. Nobody has ever officially explained what it is. No one claims it. Shortwave listeners around the world call it the buzzer. And it is only the most famous of dozens of so-called number stations, anonymous signals that have spent decades reading coded messages into the dark, most likely to spies, using a technology your grandfather would recognize instantly. Because here's the thing about those messages. You cannot intercept the receiver. A radio wave goes everywhere and leaves no trace of who was listening. A spy with a cheap shortwave set and a page of numbers is, even now, in the age of satellites and smartphones, almost impossible to catch. The oldest broadcast technology we have turned out to be one of the hardest to kill. And in a small shop in America, surrounded by machines that glow in the dark, there's a man who could have told you that 50 years ago. Frank's shop doesn't have a sign anymore. It fell down in a storm around 2009, and he never put it back up, on the theory that anyone who needs him already knows where he is. He's mostly right. The shop sits behind his house, and inside it, on shelves that bow slightly in the middle, are radios. Hundreds of them. Cathedral radios from the 30s, shaped like little wooden churches. Bakelite table sets in butterscotch and cherry red. Consoles the size of dressers, built when a radio was furniture, when it was, in fact, the furniture, the thing the couch pointed at. Zenith, Philco, RCA, Crosley, names that once meant in America what Apple means now. Frank is somewhere past 75. He won't be more specific. On the theory, he has a lot of theories, that a number that big starts to sound like a diagnosis. He's been fixing radios since he was 11 years old, when his uncle showed him the inside of a Philco and the glowing glass tubes lit up in the dark chassis like a little city at night. And that was it. That was the whole conversation. Some men get struck by lightning. Frank got struck by a Philco. He still keeps the lights in the shop low, not for atmosphere, so he can see the tubes glow. To understand what Frank does, you have to understand what a tube radio actually is, because it isn't just an old version of the thing in your car. Inside every radio from that era are vacuum tubes, sealed glass bulbs, each one with a tiny filament that heats up and glows soft orange, like a miniature light bulb with a secret job. The tubes take an invisible whisper of a signal from the air and make it louder and louder until it can move a speaker and fill a room. When you switched on a tube radio, it didn't respond instantly the way things do now. It warmed up. 10, 20 seconds of quiet while the filaments came up to temperature. A little ritual of patience before the world arrived in your living room. And arrive it did. For 30 years, radio was not an appliance. It was the fireplace of the 20th century. Families arranged their evenings around it. Kids lay on the floor in front of it with their chins in their hands. A president used it to talk the country through a depression and a war, in a voice that came through those glowing tubes into every kitchen in America at the same moment. When the news was terrible, and in those years it often was, this was the machine that said so. People didn't throw those radios away when they broke. You didn't throw away the fireplace. They called the radio man. Every town had one. Often he was the same fellow who later fixed the TVs, radio first, television after, the same glowing tubes inside both. And the radio man had a piece of magic in his corner that has almost vanished from American retail, the tube tester in the drugstore. This is real, and if you're over 60 you remember it. A machine the size of a jukebox, sitting in the corner of the pharmacy or the hardware store, covered in dials and sockets. When your radio died, you didn't need an engineering degree. You opened the back, pulled the tubes, carried them downtown in a paper bag, and plugged them one by one into the tester until the needle told you which one was bad. Then you bought a new tube out of the cabinet underneath, took it home, pushed it in, and the radio came back to life. Ordinary people, repairing their own electronics, in the middle of the drugstore. That was normal. That was Tuesday. Frank grew up on the other side of that world, the problems the drugstore couldn't solve. Because tubes were only the beginning. Inside every old radio are capacitors, little components that store and release electricity, and the ones made back then were sealed in wax and paper, and they do not age well. They leak, they drift, they fail slowly and drag the sound down with them. And about once a decade, one of them fails theatrically, with smoke, which is traditionally the moment Frank's phone rings. Most of what he does to save an old radio is what the trade calls recapping, replacing every last one of those tired capacitors with fresh ones, one solder joint at a time, 60 or 80 of them in a big console, until the circuit is honest again. It is slow, careful, unglamorous work. Then he replaces the frayed cloth power cord, because the original is by now a genuine fire hazard, tests the tubes, adjusts the dial, and switches it on. 10 seconds of nothing, while the filaments warm. Then the hum. Then the station fades up, out of a machine that last worked when Eisenhower was president. Frank has done this a few thousand times. He says the 10 seconds never get old. Every single time. He says, some part of you is 11 years old again, waiting to see if the little city lights up. Now, everyone knows how this story is supposed to go. The transistor arrived in the 50s. Radios shrank from furniture into shirt pockets. Tubes became obsolete, and the radio men faded away with them. The glowing glass bulb belongs in a museum. Except somebody forgot to tell the tubes. Vacuum tubes are still being manufactured, brand new, right now. Not for radios, for music. It turns out that when you push a tube hard, it doesn't fail ugly the way modern circuits do. It distorts warm, round, alive. That warm tube distortion is the sound of essentially every electric guitar record you have ever loved, and guitar players will not give it up. Neither will audiophiles, some of whom pay more for a glowing tube amplifier than Frank has ever paid for a car. And here's the part of the story you'd never invent. For decades, one of the biggest sources of new tubes on planet Earth has been Russia, old military tube factories that never stopped running. In 2022, when the war in Ukraine set off sanctions, the world's guitarists discovered this the hard way. Tube prices spiked overnight, suppliers rationed stock, and for a while musicians were trading vacuum tubes like a currency. Think about that. A component declared dead 70 years ago caused a global supply crisis in the 2020s. Frank finds this deeply, quietly satisfying. He spent his whole life being told his machines were obsolete by people whose machines have since become obsolete. And the radios themselves never entirely stopped matching, either, for a harder reason. Every time the weather turns catastrophic, the same sequence plays out. The power goes. The cell towers get overloaded, then go dark. The internet, which lives on both, goes with them. And officials get on the air and say the same thing they said in 1938. If you can, listen to the radio. A battery radio, or a hand crank one, receives a signal from a tower 50 miles outside the disaster, with no network, no account, no password, nothing between you and the information but air. The whole modern world stacked on top of radio. It never actually replaced it. And on the shortwave bands, past the local stations, the old strangeness is still out there too. Hobbyists talking across oceans, and yes, somewhere in the static, a voice patiently reading numbers to someone whose name we'll never know. The collectors found Frank about 15 years ago, and they've kept him busier than he ever expected to be at this age. Some of them are older people rescuing the exact radio from their childhood kitchen, the same model, sometimes literally the same radio, hauled out of a parent's estate. But a surprising number are young. They come in holding a cathedral radio bought at an estate sale, asking the question Frank likes best, which is not what's it worth, but can it play again? He teaches the ones who want to learn. There's a kid, Frank calls anyone under 50 a kid, who drives 40 minutes every other Saturday to learn recapping. And who found Frank the way the new generation finds everything, on the internet, which Frank regards as the one unambiguously good thing the internet has done. Late on a winter afternoon, the shop is dim and warm. On the bench sits a 1936 Zenith console, taller than the boy who once lay on the floor in front of it. 90 years old. Fresh capacitors, new cord, tubes tested. Frank turns the lights down the rest of the way, out of respect or superstition or both, and switches it on. Nothing. 10 seconds of nothing. Then, one by one, in the dark heart of the cabinet, the little city lights up, a dozen soft orange points, glowing exactly the way they glowed the night this radio told a living room that the war was over. The hum rises. The dial glows gold. Frank turns the knob slowly through the static until a station swims up out of the noise. Music from a tower 50 miles away, pulled out of the air by a machine built when his own father was young. He stands there in the dark and listens with his eyes closed. 90 years old, and it still catches the invisible. Some machines don't die. They just wait, in attics and basements and barns, for the one man in 100 miles who remembers how to wake them up. And somewhere out past the music, on a frequency nobody admits to owning, the numbers are still being read. Somebody's still listening. Frank could have told you that. If stories like this stay with you, subscribe, and I'll bring you the next machine that refused to die.